Secretary of Defense ordered a female soldier's arrest until 97 veterans surrounded the hospital. It started with a single command, cold, calculated, and televised for the entire nation to see. A young female soldier, wounded and silent, was branded a traitor for saving innocent lives. The Secretary of Defense called it discipline. The world called it justice. But in that moment, no one knew that his order would awaken something far stronger than fear. The loyalty of those who still remembered what honor truly meant. If you believe that courage is greater than rank, subscribe now and stay until the end, because this story will remind you what real leadership looks like. As rain fell over the Capitol, engines began to roar across the country. 97 veterans, bound by oath and memory, rode toward the same hospital where she lay in chains. They weren't carrying weapons, only truth, and the will to stand for one who once stood for them. What began as an arrest would soon become a reckoning. Power would kneel, conscience would rise, and a wounded soldier would teach an entire nation that obedience means nothing without integrity. The smell of antiseptic filled the corridor as Lieutenant Sarah Holt was wheeled into the military hospital, her uniform still soaked in sand and blood. The fluorescent lights flickered over her face, revealing the bruises of a mission gone wrong. Reporters shouted questions through barricades, hungry for a story, while soldiers stood at attention, avoiding her eyes. She didn't speak. She simply clutched her dog tags, whispering a name no one could hear. Outside, a convoy of black SUVs pulled up. The Secretary of Defense had arrived. Richard Vaughn stepped out, his polished shoes echoing authority on the marble floor. Cameras swarmed him, recording every carefully measured step. Discipline, he said to the microphones, is the backbone of our nation. Insubordination is betrayal. He didn't look at Sarah when he gave the order, "Arrest her." The words hung like gunfire. Around him, aides nodded in silence. A few soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. The line between justice and politics had never felt so thin. In her hospital room, Sarah's breathing slowed. The machines beside her beeped rhythmically, marking each second of chaos. She couldn't see. Her memory flashed back to the desert, to the screams, the children, the impossible decision that had saved lives but broken protocol. She'd known the cost the moment she'd acted. Yet now, staring at the white ceiling, her only thought was whether those children had survived. "If duty means silence," she murmured weakly, "then I choose truth." Down the hall, a nurse named Emily overheard the soldiers discussing her case. "They say she disobeyed orders to save civilians," one whispered. Another replied, "They're making her a scapegoat." Emily's heart pounded. She'd seen Sarah once before, years ago, at a field hospital where Sarah had treated wounded soldiers through the night. "That's not a traitor," Emily muttered, gripping the edge of the counter. "That's a hero." The secretary watched the news feed from his limousine, satisfaction spreading across his face as headlines began to appear. Hero or traitor, officer arrested after mission failure. He believed narrative was power, and he controlled it. But in the shadows of a nearby bar, an old man watched the same broadcast. His jaw clenched as the image of Sarah's pale face appeared on screen. Colonel James Ironheart O'Connor hadn't worn a uniform in 20 years, but that night he reached for his old phone. Sarah's arrest was broadcast live. Her wrists were cuffed gently, almost respectfully, but the sight was unbearable to those who had once fought beside her. The guards hesitated, unsure whether to salute or restrain. When one soldier whispered, "Ma'am, I'm sorry," she met his eyes and smiled faintly. "You're just following orders," she said. The irony cut deeper than any wound. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the city. The hospital lights glowed like a beacon in the dark, an unwanted symbol of corruption and courage colliding. Within hours, the first murmurs began online. Who is Sarah Holt? Why arrest a wounded soldier? Hashtags formed like sparks, spreading through the night. Somewhere far from the Capitol, engines roared to life. Veterans who had fought in forgotten wars began to move. By dawn, Vaughn received a call from his chief of staff. "Sir, there's unrest. A group of veterans is heading toward the hospital." He dismissed it with a smirk. Old men with memories. Let them come. He didn't yet understand that some memories don't fade. They march, Rain struck the hospital windows like distant applause. Inside, tension thickened. Soldiers guarded the hallway outside Sarah Holt's room, their boots tapping against the tile in nervous rhythm. Nurses passed by, avoiding eye contact, afraid to be caught sympathizing with the traitor. But not everyone looked away. Emily Carter, the same nurse who had recognized Sarah, found herself standing outside the door, her hand trembling on the clipboard. She wasn't sure if courage or curiosity had brought her there, only that silence felt like complicity. Meanwhile, in a dim living room miles away, Colonel James Ironheart O'Connor sat watching the televised arrest replay. The glow of the screen reflected off his weathered medals hung on the wall. His jaw tightened. He remembered Sarah as a cadet, quiet, sharp-eyed, always asking the questions others were afraid to. He had once told her, "The day you stop questioning orders, you stop being a soldier." Now that very defiance had become her crime. He switched off the TV and reached for his old military jacket. By dawn, O'Connor's motorcycle thundered down the empty highway. The cold air bit his face, but the ache in his chest wasn't from the wind. It was guilt. He'd trained soldiers like Sarah to follow conscience, but he had retired to comfort while people like her paid the price. As the hospital appeared on the horizon, he whispered to himself, "Not this time." The moment he parked, 2 guards stepped forward. "Sir, you can't enter." His response was calm but sharp. "I fought for this flag before your fathers could walk. I'm not asking." Inside the hospital, Emily overheard the commotion and peeked through the window. She saw O'Connor standing tall despite his limp, arguing with the officers. The guards hesitated, not out of fear, but respect. The old colonel's presence carried the weight of history. Finally, one young soldier stepped aside. "Make it quick, sir." O'Connor nodded, entering the ward. When he saw Sarah lying unconscious, his voice cracked. "You kept the promise," he murmured. He pulled a chair beside her bed and spoke softly, as though she could hear. "You saved lives, and they're calling it disobedience. You did what I trained you to do." His hand trembled over hers. "And I failed you for letting them do this." Emily, listening from the doorway, swallowed hard. The moment felt sacred, like the passing of an unspoken command. She knew then what she had to do, tell the world the truth. O'Connor left the hospital and stood beneath the rain, calling names from a worn notebook. One by one, voices answered, gravelly, aged but unbroken, old friends who had fought under his command. "She's one of ours," he told them, "and they're trying to bury her alive." There was no hesitation. Engines roared across state lines. A storm of loyalty began to move toward the city. News anchors interrupted regular programming. Reports indicate that retired military personnel are converging near the central hospital. The secretary dismissed it as unfounded rumors. Yet for the first time, unease crept into his tone. His aide asked, "Should we increase security?" Vaughn's answer came through clenched teeth. "No, I want the world to see what happens to defiance." As night fell again, the first headlights appeared through the rain, single beams cutting the darkness, growing into dozens. The low rumble of motorcycles echoed through the city streets. Inside her hospital room, Sarah stirred slightly, unaware of what was coming. The storm outside was no longer weather. It was memory, loyalty, and justice riding toward her. The first engines reached the hospital just before sunrise. The street lights flickered as if saluting the approaching roar. Nurses and orderlies rushed to windows, watching in disbelief as lines of motorcycles rolled in, each bearing a weather flag or an old unit patch. The city had never seen anything like it. Within minutes, 97 veterans had assembled at the hospital gates. They didn't shout or threaten. They simply stood, their faces solemn, their stance unshakable. They weren't there for violence. They were there for truth. Emily Carter, still inside, stared out from the third-floor window, her hand covering her mouth. She saw them, men and women in their 60s and 70s, some limping, some holding each other upright, all wearing the same look of defiance. One of them raised a sign. "We stand for her because she stood for us." Emily grabbed her phone and went live. Within minutes, thousands were watching the silent gathering. The sound of rain mixing with the hum of engines became an anthem. Colonel O'Connor moved through the crowd, his limp steady, his eyes fierce. He raised his voice above the rain. No weapons. No chaos. We hold this line with honor. The veterans responded with a synchronized nod. The hospital became a fortress, not of walls, but of will. Police cruisers arrived soon after, lights flashing red and blue. But even they hesitated. The sight of those metals glinting under the storm was disarming. It wasn't rebellion. It was remembrance. Inside, the secretary's aide burst into his office. "Sir, there's a situation outside the hospital." Vaughn didn't look up from his papers. "Handle it." "We can't, sir. They're veterans. All of them." Vaughn froze, his pen hovering midair. He hadn't anticipated loyalty, surviving past orders. "Then remind them who give the orders now," he snapped. But deep down, a quiet unease had already begun to erode his certainty. Back at the hospital, the media trucks arrived. Cameras zoomed in on the veterans' faces, each line telling a story of war, loss, and brotherhood. A reporter tried to interview O'Connor, but he simply said, "She did what was right. That's all the story anyone needs." The clip went viral within the hour. By noon, #97for1 was trending across the nation. Soldiers on active duty watched silently from their barracks. Some saluted the screen. Emily made her way to Sarah's room and found her awake for a brief moment. Sarah's voice was weak. "What's happening outside?" Emily hesitated, then whispered, "Your brothers came for you." Sarah blinked, tears pooling in her eyes. "Tell them I didn't mean to cause this." Emily smiled softly. "You didn't cause it. You inspired it." As dusk fell, the veterans lit candles, forming a circle of light around the hospital. The flames reflected in their eyes like stars resurrected from old battles. The police chief approached O'Connor. "If they don't disperse, I'll be ordered to remove them." O'Connor stepped closer, his voice steady. "Then you'll have to start with me." The officer looked at him for a long moment, then quietly walked away. The line held. Inside his mansion, the secretary watched the news feed, the chants of the crowd rising through the speakers. His reflection appeared on the TV, trembling under the words scrolling beneath. Secretary ordered arrest. Veterans surround hospital. For the first time, Richard Vaughn turned the volume down. Silence, he realized, could be louder than command. By the next morning, the air outside the hospital was electric with anticipation. Reporters crowded behind barricades, microphones raised like bayonets, demanding answers. The veterans remained unmoving, their silence louder than any chant. In a nearby van, Emily Carter edited the footage she had captured. Every moment of Sarah's arrest, every speech, every face of those standing guard. As she reviewed one clip, she noticed something strange. A man in uniform handing O'Connor a sealed envelope before disappearing into crowd. Her instincts told her this was a turning point. Inside the hospital, O'Connor opened the envelope beneath the dim glow of a bedside lamp. The paper inside was old, stamped classified. His breath caught as he read the words. It was the original mission report, unchanged, unredacted. It documented the civilian casualties that the secretary had erased from the public record. More damningly, it proved that Sarah's insubordination had saved 23 children. The secretary had buried the truth to protect his political career. O'Connor exhaled slowly, knowing that this was no longer about one soldier. It was about the soul of the nation. Emily burst into the room, breathless. "What is it?" O'Connor handed her the report without a word. As she read, her hand began to shake. This changes everything." "Exactly," he said. "But the truth alone won't set her free. The people must see it." Emily nodded, her journalist instincts igniting. She uploaded a photo of the document and prepared a live broadcast. Within minutes, the internet erupted. Hashtag the hidden report replaced hashtag 97for1. The secretary's phone buzzed relentlessly as his communications team tried to control the wildfire. "Sir, the document's authentic. We've confirmed it." Vaughn's voice cracked. "Destroy it." "We can't, sir. It's everywhere now." He slammed his fist on the desk, the facade of control shattering. Cameras outside his mansion caught him pacing behind glass, his composure unraveling. The man who once spoke in calm authority now looked hunted. Meanwhile, at the hospital, tension reached its breaking point. News helicopters circled overhead. O'Connor stepped onto the steps, the report in his hand. The crowd parted. Cameras zoomed in as he raised the paper high. "This," he declared, "is what they call disobedience." His voice echoed through loudspeakers, raw with conviction. A soldier who refused to let children die was branded a traitor. If that's betrayal, then honor has lost its meaning. The veteran saluted as flashbulbs exploded. The speech spread across networks like wildfire. In military bases, soldiers watched in stunned silence. Some stood, others saluted the screen. One young recruit whispered, "That could be me one day." The image of O'Connor standing beneath the rain, the classified report in his hand, became a symbol. The public demanded answers. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves. The Secretary's office released a cold, mechanical statement. The department denies the authenticity of all unverified materials. No one believed it. Inside her hospital room, Sarah regained full consciousness. Emily entered, eyes shining with hope. "They know the truth now," she said softly. Sarah turned her head toward the window, where she could see the silhouettes of veterans holding candles through the rain. "No," she replied, her voice calm but heavy. "Now, they must choose what to do with it." That night, O'Connor's phone buzzed with an anonymous message. "He's ordering a containment operation at dawn." He stared at the screen, then looked toward the rows of men outside the hospital. "If he wants a war," he muttered, "he'll have to fight ghosts." The thunder rolled above as he stepped into the night, ready for whatever came next. Dawn arrived under a sky of iron and smoke. The streets around the hospital were sealed off by armored vehicles and soldiers in riot formation. Orders had come directly from the Secretary. Disperse them at any cost. But as the troops advanced, they saw who stood before them. Veterans wearing their medals, holding photos of fallen comrades, hands raised in peaceful defiance. No one moved. The silence was unbearable. Even the youngest soldiers hesitated, realizing they were facing their own future selves. Inside the hospital, Sarah watched from the window, her breath fogging the glass. Emily stood beside her, live streaming every second. "He's going to make a mistake he can't undo," Emily whispered. Sarah turned to her, eyes steady. "Then we'll make sure the world remembers it." She reached for Emily's phone. "Put me on camera." Moments later, the feed flickered, and Sarah's pale, determined face filled screens across the nation. "This is Lieutenant Sarah Holt," she began. "They call me a traitor for saving children. But no soldiers serve a flag by killing their conscience." Her voice broke, but her conviction didn't. "To the men outside, please don't fight for me. Fight for what's right. We don't need weapons to defend truth." The message spread instantly. Soldiers lowered their rifles. The commanding officer hesitated, radio crackling with Vaughn's furious voice. "Proceed with the order." The officer looked at the veterans, then at Sarah's image streaming live on his tablet. He switched off the radio and shouted, "Stand down!" The line of troops broke apart, confusion turning into awe. At that moment, Vaughn burst into the hospital's control center, veins bulging with rage. "Cut that transmission now." But it was too late. Every major news network had already mirrored the feed. The entire nation watched the Secretary's face as he stormed toward Sarah's room. The cameras followed, uninvited, capturing his trembling hands as he slammed the door open. Sarah lay weak but unafraid. "You think this makes you a hero?" he spat. She looked at him, voice calm. "No, sir. It reminds everyone what one looks like." The words pierced deeper than any accusation. Vaughn staggered back, realizing he'd become the villain in his own performance. Outside, chants began to rise, first hundreds, then thousands. Honor before orders. Honor before orders. The Secretary walked toward the window and saw the veterans forming ranks, saluting the hospital. The rain turned to sunlight as if the storm itself had surrendered. Something inside him broke. He turned toward Sarah again, tears mixing with sweat. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. Sarah answered softly, the truth. Vaughn sank to his knees beside her bed, the camera still rolling. For a long moment, the world stood still, a powerful man kneeling before the soldier he had tried to destroy. Emily's voice trembled as she whispered behind the camera. He knelt. The image flooded every screen. In homes, schools, and bases across the nation, silence reigned, followed by applause. For once, justice didn't shout. It bowed. Vaughn rose slowly, hands shaking and faced cameras. I was wrong, he said. This soldier acted with the honor I lost. It wasn't redemption. It was surrender. As security escorted him away, Sarah closed her eyes, exhaustion overtaking her. She didn't see the crowds outside dropping to one knee in solidarity, nor the soldiers saluting the veterans. Emily leaned close and whispered, "You changed everything." Sarah smiled faintly. "No," she murmured, fading into sleep. "We did." A week later, the hospital grounds were silent again, but this time, not with fear. The same courtyard that had once echoed with sirens now carried the hum of soft conversation, the rustle of flags, and the sound of boots marching in respect. Rows of chairs faced a small podium draped with the national flag. There were no politicians, no generals, no speeches rehearsed by aides. Only soldiers, nurses, and civilians who had come to honor the woman whose courage had reminded them what loyalty truly meant. Lieutenant Sarah Holt walked slowly onto the platform, supported by a cane and Emily at her side. Her uniform had been restored, the stains of battle replaced by the gleam of new medals, but her eyes carried the same quiet fire. Colonel O'Connor stood beside her, his posture straight despite his limp. The two exchanged a look of shared understanding, not triumph, but peace. "You shouldn't be standing yet," O'Connor murmured. Sarah smiled faintly. "After all this, sir, how could I not?" Before the gathered crowd, O'Connor raised a weathered medal, the one he wore in his final battle decades earlier. "This belonged to a man who once saved my life," he said. "Today, it belongs to someone who saved our honor." He pinned it over her heart. The audience rose in unison, veterans saluting as the anthem began to play. No one commanded them to stand. They simply knew they must. Emily's camera streamed the ceremony live. The comment section filled faster than she could read. Real hero. Faith in humanity restored. Honor isn't obedience. In the control room of a small TV station, an editor whispered. She changed history with a whisper, not a bullet. The broadcast cut to the crowd outside, the 97 veterans in formation, hands on their hearts, each holding a candle that glowed in the soft afternoon light. At the edge of the ceremony, a child Sarah had once saved approached her, clutching a drawing, a soldier with wings standing between two flags. "My mother said you're the reason I'm here," the girl said. Sarah knelt, smiling through tears. "No, sweetheart. The reason you're here is because people chose to care." She took the drawing and pressed it against her chest like a medal far greater than any she'd earned. Meanwhile, Richard Vaughn watched from his quiet home, the sound of the anthem drifting through his television. He was no longer Secretary of Defense, only a man haunted by a single image, the day he knelt. As the screen showed Sarah standing beneath the flag, he whispered, "You did what I couldn't." For the first time in decades, his eyes filled with tears not of pride, but of regret. When the ceremony ended, O'Connor turned to the assembled veterans. "We stood for one," he said, his voice steady. "And one reminded us why we stand at all." The crowd erupted into applause, not for victory, but for remembrance. The phrase 97 for one echoed to the square, carried by wind, voices, and the beating of hearts that had once fought wars of flesh but were now fighting wars of conscience. That night, as the candles burned low, Emily narrated her final broadcast. What began as an arrest became an awakening. Power knelt. Truth stood. And from the silence of one soldier, an entire nation remembered its soul. Her voice broke softly on the last words. Outside, a single motorcycle engine started, then another, until 97 lights moved slowly into the horizon, a farewell that was also a promise. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it so others remember that real courage doesn't come from rank. It comes from conscience. More stories like this are on the way. Join us. Stand with truth and keep the flame alive.